Let's start with our first use case of notifying the account data team to update the account once it's created with the most up-to-date information about that account, whether by using a third-party tool or by manually looking it up. We are going to create that flow. And if you are not familiar with the entire use case, please check out my previous video, and this is part of that series as well. So we're going to start with new flow. You can go to setup, flow, and just click new flow. Once you're here, you'll see there are a lot of options to create new flow. There are different types of flow. So let's quickly talk about these different types and when to use them. Screen flow, as the name suggests, is a screen flow that guides the user through different interactions. So if you have a process in place where the user needs to click on something, and based on that input, you want to do certain other things. So it's more like a guided interface. And that's what screen flows are really powerful for. You can also combine them with like other Lightning components if the standard does not meet your requirement. Record triggered flow, on the other hand, are record triggered flows. So they are actually launched when a record is created or updated or even deleted. And you can do certain things in the background when a certain record is updated or any action is performed on that record. Schedule triggered flow are batches. So if you have something that needs to happen every day at a given time, for example, you want to send a reminder to all the sales rep if there are opportunities in negotiation stage to make sure they're up to date on different things that's happening on that opportunity. So that's a really good use case for a batch triggered flow. This is at a specific time and frequency for each record. Platform event triggered flow is something that can be launched based on a platform event. If you don't know what platform events are, check out my other video where I go more about platform events. But these are not standard object or object based. These are more triggered on a platform event. So similar to record triggered, but they get triggered on a platform event instead of a record. And auto launched, I have not used them since I stopped using process, but these are the flows that you can launch them from process, for example, or also from Apex. They also work in the background. So only this is the first one. It's something that users will interact with. The remaining, all of them actually work in the background. And these are just the core, and there is also all plus templates. So once you get more familiar with core flows, you may want to check out the all plus templates, because you have different templates that Salesforce gives you out of the box. For example, if there is user provisioning flow and you know like there is a requirement around provisioning a user, you can maybe start here and start building out and changing things as needed. So this is really powerful as well, like a contact request flow. Instead of building everything from scratch, this is like something Salesforce comes with. You can modify as needed as you go. Figure out your use cases. All right. So in our use case, we want to trigger the data update request whenever an account is created. So that to me is a record triggered flow use case, because we are doing something on a record triggered and nobody's necessarily entering information, or we don't need any user inputs for this one. So we're going to click on that, hit create, and we're brought to this screen. Now in this screen, we just need to select the object that we want this record to fire on. We're going to do account because that's our object. Trigger the flow when the record is created. Now there are different options you can do on created, on updated, created or updated, or a record is deleted. I'm going to leave it to created. Condition requirements. Now what is my condition? Maybe we want to say if the account source, if this account is coming from a phone inquiry, for example, just a very random requirement. And what do we want to do when that happens? Now there are two options. One, you want to probably update certain fields on that same object. So for example, an account is created and the status of the account is active, for example, or the account active field is true, then you want to set the status of the same account that was created to something else, like a customer status. In that case, you will use fast field updates, because in this case, you are just updating the fields on the same account that triggered the flow. Okay, so this is more for if you're updating the fields on the same record. Action and related records are something that will do either send an email out or create a related record or update a related record. Anything that does not have to do with the same object or the same record, we will use actions and related records. So in our case, we are looking to create a task for that data team to go in and update the account. So we will be using action and related records, not the fast fill updates, because we are not looking to update anything on that account. Okay, and then there's another option, include a run asynchronously path. Now this is really powerful for things when you want to make a call out to an external system. And it doesn't have to always be a call out. Maybe you want to do something asynchronously, and it is good to think about this as you're building automations, because not everything needs to be in real time. Maybe some things they are fine waiting for. Even for this case, maybe I will include a asynchronous path, because when account is created, even if the task gets created like a few seconds delayed, it's fine. I'm not waiting for that record. So I will include a asynchronous path and hit done. So, and now we are here on the flow builder. And as you can see, this is the new layout. There are two layouts actually, auto layout and free form. Okay, so let's look at different elements and briefly talk about it. So you can either run immediately or asynchronously. I will choose to run asynchronously because I don't want this on real time. It doesn't have to be on real time. Okay, now there are different interaction, which is action and subflows. Then logic. Logic is where you either decide what we want to do. So maybe there are different paths you want to take based on field. So that's decision. Looping comes into play when you are looking at a lot of records and looping through this, and maybe you want to do certain things from that collection of records. We will get into that example later on in this video or in future videos. And collection sort, collection filter, these are all different logic that you can do within the flow. Our first use case is really simple, so we may not use any of these in this case. Now data, you can create records, update, get, and delete. So they are pretty self-explanatory. If you are getting something from Salesforce, maybe you want to grab all the contacts of an account or some fields for that account, so you can use get records for that. If you want to create something, you will do create records. So if I wanted to do create records on here, if I click on this, you will see there are again other options. So whenever you have options, read them. Okay, so how many records do you want to create? One, because I want to create one task per account. And then how to set the record fields. You can either use all values from a record. To be able to use this first option, you will have to have a resource of record type. You cannot just use this option if you don't have anything. Now there is more set of options, which is new resource. Now when you go to resource type, you will see different options. You can either create a variable, which is like I like to call it like a container that can contain different types of values in it, variable. And when you select variable, you'll again have multiple options. You can say you want a text variable, you want a record variable, number, currency, these different things. Think of them like field types, if you will. And the record field type is more like you can associate this with a particular object. So if I pick record, I will have to now select which object record I want to store. Okay. If I want to create a task, I will say I want to do a task variable. Okay. And naming convention is really important, especially if your flow starts to get more complicated. It's easy to find things if you have named them properly. So I'm going to say var task. So that's my task variable. I just created a var task. You can also just go to new resource here and create them if you already know what you're going to do. So I'm just going to say var task, create that. Okay, so this is my record, and I just want to create task. And is that all we need? That's it. Var task created and hit done. Okay, so now we created a var task, right? So all we did is we just created a simple variable of record type, record data type, and associated with task. But where are we actually defining what the task should be? Because when you create a task in Salesforce, you need to have certain fields populated. You need to have the subject, you need to have the date, who it is assigned to, and so on. We haven't done any of that yet. So for now, this task variable is just empty variable. If we just let it run, nothing is going to happen because it's just creating an empty shell task variable, task record. So we need something else. Okay, now maybe we need to assign the values for those variables, right? We have set variable values, that's assignment. Now we can use this to assign the values for the task variable. Click on that, see what's in there. Okay, so we have certain variables and we can use some operators and assign certain values. That looks like something we can use, right? So let's say set task variable. You can add descriptions here and task. Now the moment you say task, see, that's the power of using that object variable, because now you have var task dot and all these different fields from the task that you can just get right there. Activity date, what do we want our due date to be? And this is where it depends on your SLA, how fast do you want the accounts to come back to you validated, right? I am just going to say like maybe n+2 days. Within 2 days they need to get back to me. Now as you can see, it's like you can hard code the dates, which we obviously don't want to do because that will change, right? I can also say give me the same date. Maybe I want it on the same day, but I really don't want any of that. I want to add a rule here. How do you do that? API, flow, none of those ring a bell to me. Let's see what else we can do under new resource, right? So here you have variable constant formula. What is that? So can we use a formula within the flow to set a value? Yes, of course. So formula is var, I'm just gonna say due date formula. And formula is like one of the really powerful techniques inside the flow that you can actually use, and it works very similar to formula field. So yeah, if you have built a formula field before, this is a very similar concept. The only difference is that the flow builder does not have that formula field builder, so you have to be really careful. But if it is wrong, when you try to save the flow, it will tell you, so you will find out pretty quickly. All right, so we create a formula. So just like how in the formula field you'll have to select a data type, right? You'll have to say whether it's text, number, date. In this case we want to have it date because we're trying to say the date should be +2 from today. You know, I want to do today, and I'm just guessing, hoping that this is the right formula syntax. Today +2. So whatever day the flow was triggered, +2. That's my date. 2 days from today. Okay, hit done. I don't know still if that formula was correct or not, but we'll just move on with that anyway. Then what else do we need? A subject will be nice. So var task dot subject of that task, and you can just hard code it here or maybe create another text resource to add that value there. So I'm just gonna say data update count data request. Then we can also add type task subtype equals. None of these apply to me, so I'm just gonna add a value data request. And what else? It will be nice to relate this task to that account, right? So we can say what ID, var task dot what ID. What ID is the API name of related to ID, so if you want to relate the task to certain object. Now here we can use record. So whenever you're creating a record triggered flow, you'll automatically get this record global variable. All that means is it actually has all the values from that record that is triggering the flow. So in this case, record dot what ID, record dot ID is what we need, because we need the account ID here. So account ID. All right, next thing we need to do is assign this task to that queue that we created. So there are two ways to do that. Okay, let me just go show you the first way here. Now assign to is basically on var task, you've got who ID, that is who it is assigned to, equals. Here you can hard code the value if you want. You can just hard code the ID of that queue. Let's go to the queue here, find queue and data. I currently only have set to supported object case. I will also add a task there because I think I was trying to use case before, but now I just switched to task. That's fine, we can assign that here. And we need to get the ID of this data to hard code it, which I don't recommend, but I just want to show you the easy or quick way to do this. So if we do data export, it's called group in the background, which is somewhat misleading, but basically anytime you have queues in the background, it's the group object. And we have this queue here, and how do you know this is by using 00G. Whenever there's G, you know that it's a queue. And I'm just using the data queue. Let's go here, and you can just assign this, hard code it here. And if we missed any required fields, we'll get an error, so not to worry about that. Okay, so I've got a set task variable. We set the task, we get the data task. Now if we didn't want to hard code this, we'll look into that later, but if we didn't want to hard code this, we could get the data and assign that value here. First, let us save this so we don't lose all this work that we did. So there is also a naming convention that you can follow while saving the flow. So you can say account, because it's firing on account, create flow. Okay, be sure to give a good description. You can call it data. If you are looking to create more account create flow, you can also add the actual use case here or in the description. So whatever org you are in, follow all that org's naming convention. Alright, so for a flow that contains scheduled paths, specify the default work user in your org's process automation settings. Okay, so this is something you'll have to do if you are trying to use these scheduled paths. Read the problems carefully and just follow what it is telling you to do. Specify the default workflow user in your org's process automation settings. So what do? We go to the process automation setting. This is our process automation settings. And just define a default work user. It's usually the admin. I'm going to save this. And there are other very interesting things inside the process automation, like who should get the email if a flow fails. You can send it to an actual email address, or maybe whoever modified the last flow. It's usually a good idea to have an Apex exception email recipient, so it goes to one email rather than sending it to like whoever modified it last. Okay, so now let's save this again. Save as a new version. The save is now we don't have that error anymore, which means we are good. Now we can try to debug this. Now I have yet to see if I can debug the run asynchronously process, so we'll find out now. So debug, run asynchronously. I'm going to skip the start conditions and search for a random account in my org. See if I have a test account. I don't. Okay, edge communications is fine. Alright, let's run this. Now before you activate any flow, it's important to just like debug that to see if you're doing things right or not. And very quickly it's telling me that something is wrong and I may have field integrity exceptions, ID of incorrect type. So what does that mean? We cannot assign a task to this ID. New task. And that is true, like I cannot assign who ID to queue. That's either contacts or leads. So there's a mistake I made here. Now let's go back and fix this, right? So that's why debugging is so important. Now I'm gonna go task variable settings or assignment, and whatever I did here that's wrong, it actually should be the owner, not the who ID. Silly mistake, but it happens. So assigned to ID is what should be the queue, not the who ID. Okay, now let's save this again, and same process, we're gonna debug this. Run asynchronously, skip start conditions, and it's gonna add this account. Now let's see what happens. Maybe we'll get more errors. Okay, so now you can see there are different errors this time. The bad value for restricted pick list, we just added account data request randomly there, which is probably not a good thing to do. So for now, we'll just remove this field altogether. Now save it, and hopefully we got all the required fields. If I just go to create a new task, what are the required fields? We also need to give it a status, otherwise the default status is not started, which is also fine. You can give it a due date, which you already did, and priority. Maybe let's make it a high priority instead of medium. So that's another thing we can set. Var task and priority equals high. Okay, save this and debug again. Same steps. Okay, now let's run this. This time looks like there is no error, so far so good, and it's telling me, okay, this is the task that will be created. 2022 5/31 will be the activity date, the due date, and today is 5/29 plus 2, so 5/31, so that works. And it's gonna assign it to the account 001, that's the account ID, and it's gonna put into that queue. Okay. You may also choose to add more description to that task, which I recommend you do, because right now it's just taking the tasks and adding it and not telling any information. So you may want to add some like description. I'm not going to go through that right now, but feel free to play around with that on your own. Okay, so everything looks good so far. I'm going to activate this flow and test it out in real time if this works as we expected or not. Alright, so now let's test it out. So I'm going to pretend as the marketing person, right? Creating a lead, phone inquiry, and that's all the information needed here. So I'm going to save this test account lead, and then let's convert this lead. I'm just going to create a new account, new contact, and I'm not going to create an opportunity right now. Convert. So this should create an account and a contact for me. Let's go to test account. And if everything worked, I should also have a task created. So account got created, and the account source will be the phone inquiry because that was the lead source. That's standard lead to account mapping. And there I have it, the task that was created. And more importantly, it is assigned to the data queue that we hard-coded in the flow. Now, next thing I want to do is also make it not hard-coded, because when you create that task in a new environment, it may have a different ID. So what you can do here is, before you assign that ID, you can first query that task. So you can say get records, get task data queue, and in this case you are going to query group object, and you can say developer name equals data, and that will return you that particular queue that you are interested in. And I need only the first record. You can store all the fields, hit done. Now go back to your assignment, and instead of this 00G, you will say the thing that you just created, group get task from data queue, dot ID, because you need that ID of the group. We already confirmed this with the query that we did earlier. So hit done, and let's save this as a new version. Test this out again just to make sure you have everything correct. Synchronously hit run. Now what we want to check for is that ID, because that's the only thing we changed. Okay, so the owner ID is still 00Z, so means it queried the right one. So if you can go here, get records, it's getting the task data queue successfully found records, which means seems to be working, and then it's going in here and assigning those values. You can see all the different values that were assigned. Okay, pretty sweet. So debug is definitely your best friend while you're building flow. It lets you go through each steps, see what happened, where did we error out. So very good skill to have when you're building flow is the debugging skill. And don't get overwhelmed if you get errors in your first few times. That is completely normal. I get errors all the time. The point is you have to be able to go into the debug and figure out what the error was. All right, that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and please let me know if you have any questions in the comments.